going on, everybody? Wanted to put out a quick video going over the Sweet 16. This is kind of my early thoughts on each game. If you didn't catch the video that I did post on TikTok or Instagram, I kind of gave a little brief rundown of a couple of games I like. But in this one, we're going to go over every single game. I'm going to give you guys kind of my early thoughts and leans, and I'm going to point you to any trends that I'm seeing here 2 days before we tip off for the Sweet 16. So we had a really good first round of 64 and round of 32. We're going to keep that going. So let's just get right into it. Start off on Thursday. First game is going to be Clemson versus Arizona. Arizona's laying 7.5 points now. To Clemson, the line has ticked up just a little bit. And this is a pretty interesting game because where the line is now, I maybe see a little bit of value on Clemson, but they're kind of in a bit of a unique position. Other than NC State, who's a double-digit seed, Clemson is the next highest seed as a 6 here against the number 2 Arizona. And the 6 seed has some interesting stuff here in the Sweet 16. So recently they've been doing well, right? Over the last 10 years, they're 10-4 against the spread in the Sweet 16. But the interesting thing about a 6 seed is that if they pull off that upset in the Sweet 16, they're typically almost always out in the Elite 8. So this is a really interesting weekend for Clemson because if they make it by Arizona, which would be a sizable upset, then they would be mega fade material in the Elite 8. Because no 6 seed has reached a Final Four since 1992. So the furthest they typically get over the last 30 plus years is to the Elite 8 before they actually fall. And before that, only 4 6 seeds ever have made it to a Final Four. And in those games, they're 1-3 against the spread. But just a tough spot if Clemson were to get by Arizona. But just for this game specifically, I like the trends pointing them. I like them as a dog. And they're no stranger to playing fast. We know Arizona wants to play fast, push the pace, shoot a lot of threes. Clemson is not a particularly slow tempo team. They're top 100 in the country in terms of adjusted tempo per KenPom. So they can run, and they're a very good free throw shooting team, which could be very important late in these games. If it's an 8, 9, 10-point game late, you know what starts to happen, the foul game. We saw something similar with Houston, Texas A&M, where it looked like Houston could cover that spread, and then the game ends up going to overtime. So just watch out for that. I would early lean here to Clemson. Nothing from me on the total. I think it's set properly. Excuse me. Next game, San Diego State versus Yukon. The Aztecs are now catching 11 points in some books. Consensus line looks like 11. You can maybe get 10.5 here and there. This opened at 9.5, so it's starting to steam up. And maybe you want to take the angle here of, because remember, this is a rematch of last year's championship game. So I could understand a play on the angle of revenge for San Diego State, or maybe they go back and look at that game, and see what they could clean up. Why was Yukon so successful? Because that really, if you recall, wasn't really that competitive of a game. And the spread in that game was less than this one. But at the same time, you could make the argument that Yukon this year is a better team than the national championship winning team they had last year. So for me, there's not much in this matchup. There is a nice total trend here, which I did post over on Twitter/X. If you're not following us over there, go check it out. But Sweet 16 favorites of 8 or more. So when the spread is -8 or more, the under's on a 22-8 run in the last 30 times this has come up. That's 73%. So that's something you can maybe look at as well. The total's currently sitting at 135.5, and I do see some value on it towards the under. So that could be a play in this game. In terms of the side, if you forced me to pick a side, I would lean to Yukon because I just think they're so good and they're playing so well right now. But for me, it's probably a pass if I actually had to bet it, which obviously we don't. So pass on the side, lean under on the total. A game that I do like the side on, though, is Alabama versus North Carolina. And here we have a 1-4 matchup, which historically the 1 seed has dominated. The 1 seed, I believe, is 12-2 straight up over the last 10 tournaments against the 4 in the Sweet 16 and 10-4 against the spread. So interesting spot for North Carolina. The line's ticked up a little bit, but I'm still seeing value on the 4 for the Tar Heels. So I like North Carolina -4 in this game. That's my lean. As far as the total, you're going to be surprised when you see this number. 173.5 is a huge total. I mean, it jumps out compared to all these other games. It jumps off the board. And I think there's value on that under because I think UNC is going to have to make this a half-court game. What's the last thing you want to do if you're the Tar Heels? You don't want to run with Alabama. All right, Grand Canyon did a good job of this. They used their size, their length to keep them in that game for a very long time. Alabama has a great offense. They only put up 71 points against them. And even though they covered that spread, that was a game to the last minute, the last seconds of that game, when Grand Canyon just completely folded. But they actually had a lead late in that second half. So Bama is certainly vulnerable. So if they had trouble with them, the size of North Carolina, I think, is going to be too much. The Davis-Sears matchup will be a good one to watch, but I think Davis will get the better of him, and I think Baycott's going to obviously be the difference down low. But North Carolina look really good defensively, so much better. I think the defensive disparity is really going to show in this matchup, and I like the Tar Heels to take it. And in terms of the total, like I said, I think they're going to have to make this a half-court game, slow it down. So I see some value on that 173.5. I mean, think about that. You could have a game where both teams get into the 80s, and you'll still hit this under. 88-80, right? You hit this under. I mean, I just think that number is a bit inflated based on how these teams have looked so far in the tournament. So I would lean to North Carolina, and I would lean to the under in that game. And then you finally wrap up the night with Illinois-Iowa State. Best to me on that day, Thursday, this is the most interesting matchup, the best matchup. It's basically going to be defense versus offense, guys, right? Because Iowa State has the much better defense. Illinois has the much better offense. So it's kind of going to be interesting to see which team establishes their style of play. I personally lean to Illinois as a dog in this one, catching 1.5, 2 points. I understand the angle to Iowa State, but to me, that offense is not trustworthy. Even in that game against Washington State, there were sections of that game where they were in major droughts offensively. They eventually pulled away thanks to their phenomenal defense. But I'm a little bit concerned at how that defense holds up against the way Illinois plays offensively, the guards they have. I think the Illini I think for this round, the offense is going to be too much, and it will negate their weaknesses on defense. I could see them skirting by in this game and outscoring Iowa State. So I like Illinois, and to me, the total is about where I'd have it. So no play on the total for me there. But a lean to the Fighting Illini. The next day, we got NC State, which is the only double-digit seed we have left, versus Marquette, and they're catching 6.5 points against Marquette. This is another one this to me is one of those games where, I don't really see anything. I would stay away. If I had to pick, I would lean to Marquette. I think NC State's run's been amazing, but you got to ask the question, how much longer can it go on? I thought they would have a letdown against Texas Tech in the round of 64. That did not happen. And then, say what you want about Oakland's amazing win over Kentucky, and it was amazing, but we got to be realistic about this. NC State got lucky that upset happened. A little bit of a lucky draw. And that game had no business going to overtime. But again, this is what happens when you have these high variance teams that kind of make a little run. So to me, Marquette is much better defensively, much better offensively. The only thing here is just going to be, do they execute? Do they keep their foot down on the pedal for 40 minutes? If they do, I think they cover the spread. But to me, not much else in this game. Gonzaga Purdue is a 5-1 matchup, and the Zags are now catching 5.5. And I'm starting to see that 5.5 tick down to 5 on a couple of books. And honestly, I agree with that movement. It opened 4.5. I think there's value on the 5.5 right now for Gonzaga. Purdue is one of these teams, like, yes, Edey is going to be a problem for the opposing defense, but like I said in my other video, Purdue is one of these teams where every time you think they have it finally figured out, they just fall flat on their face. And I don't necessarily think that's going to happen in this game, but I think this is going to be a close game. And I think the Gonzaga offense is going to give them a lot of problems. And Purdue really hasn't beaten anybody. You look at their first round matchup was a laugher, and then you get Utah State, who I think TCU would have been a bigger challenge for Purdue. Utah State is not really a good team to begin with. The Mountain West has been a disaster in this tournament recently, so it wasn't too crazy about that win. Gonzaga played a short-handed Kansas, but it's still Kansas, right? It's still Bill Self. It's a Blue Bloods program. They've got talent on that roster. They just didn't have enough depth, and without their best player, it made it very difficult for them to hang with them. But, to me, that's more of an impressive win than both of Purdue's wins. So I'm going to have to go with the Zags here, plus 5.5. I think that if they either win this game outright, which I may have a sprinkle on the money line, but if they don't, I think they at the very minimum give Purdue a pretty big scare in this one. So I like the Zags with the points. All right, moving on to another 1-4 matchup. I mentioned earlier in the North Carolina-Alabama game, the 1 seeds have dominated the 4 seeds. You've got Duke here as the 4. You've got Houston here as the 1, laying 4 points. I think this got up to, this opened 3.5. I think it got up to 4.5 at one point. It's come back down a little bit. And this is, you know, with Iowa State, Illinois, this to me is the next most interesting game because Duke has looked completely unstoppable offensively through the first 2 rounds, and their guard play has been so good. But on the flip side, they haven't really played anybody, right? They get Vermont in the round of 64. They get JMU, who pulls off the upsets, kind of like similar to the Oakland situation, right? You have this huge upset, then you go into the next round, a bit of a letdown, and JMU was never competitive in that game. So for me, you know, even though Houston had the scare against Texas A&M, to me, Texas A&M is better than both teams that Duke played to get here, and I think by a pretty wide margin. I mean, that A&M team is very solid defensively, great rebounding team, and they got hot offensively. So I think that was a big challenge, bigger challenge than the games that Duke played. And I think this line here is kind of, I think you have a little bit of value in Houston because of that scare. Maybe they look vulnerable, and Duke has looked so good. So I think you have a little bit of value on the Cougars because when you look at the matchups, they favor Houston. Duke has been relying on their guard play in this round, in this tournament so far, but they haven't played a team that has the perimeter defenders that Houston does. They have the personnel to stop the Duke guards. It's just about whether or not they're up to the challenge and they execute. But I think Houston is set up nicely on the defensive end. They're going to have to find ways to score like they did against A&M. But I think they have the edge in this game. So I would lay my number for this game is 5.5. So where it's sitting right now at 4, I would lean to Houston. I would look to lay the points with Houston, and hard to look away from the under on that total. I'd probably lean under there. But my stronger lean is to the side. Okay, and then wrapping up with Creighton versus Tennessee. Creighton right now is a 2.5-point underdog. And here's another one of these games, similar to Illinois, where I think you could make a case that the wrong team is favored. I see some books now bumping it up to 3, so there's money flowing in on Tennessee. I'm comfortable with that. Like I said earlier in the video, I'm not one of these steam chasers. If a line's moving one way, I'll gladly take the other side if I see that it's getting me more value. So Creighton plus 3 looks like it could be a play for us. But I would definitely lean to their side. Tennessee, to me, was not super impressive against Texas. They really let them hang around. And Texas obviously covered that spread. And in terms of this under, 143.5, I would lean under in this game. One quick note about these totals. Each one I've been saying I lean under. The overs will start to hit in the next round. So that's kind of like an interesting thing. The overs don't really start to hit until the Elite Eight. Seems like the books start to adjust after the Sweet 16, and then, variance happens. But, so for me, Creighton, even though they did struggle to get by Oregon going into overtime, or I believe it was double overtime, to me, Oregon pretty strong. Oregon was very hot coming into this tournament. They played a great first round, and that was a small spread. And I think Creighton here is set up for a little upset. And even though Tennessee has looked really good, I can't fully trust them yet. I got to see, how they perform in this game. The Rick Barnes thing is still active. That's there, right? So everybody knows about that. But one thing that is pointing to Tennessee, which could be why this money's flowing in, is that 2 seeds are 29-17 against the spread versus 3 seeds all time. So that's 63% ATS, 32-18 straight up. So that could be something, if you like Tennessee, you could look at that game. You could look at that angle. For me, I'm leaning to Creighton. I don't know if that's going to be an actual play yet for us. I have kind of like 2 games in my mind right now that I know I'm going to be betting, which will be out on the full card later this week. But right now, these are just leans. And I'll leave you guys with this. One interesting thing is that as you approach the Sweet 16 round, right, 1 seeds historically do great in this round. Okay, so there's no, it's usually chalky. If you didn't have a 1 seed get knocked out early on, they typically dominate this round. And we still have all the 1 seeds. We still have all the 2 seeds. And the next thing I'll say is, but look forward to the weekend, because if all the 1 seeds get through here, a 1 seed normally falls in the Elite Eight. All right, only one Final Four ever has had all 4 1 seeds in it. So meaning that if they all get to the Elite Eight, one or 2 of them should get knocked out, right? That's the logic here. So we look at history to try to predict what's going to happen. So history says, hey, only one time ever has there been a Final Four with all the 1 seeds. So if they all get to the Elite Eight, now you can start thinking upsets. You can start looking, is Purdue vulnerable if they get by Gonzaga? Is Houston vulnerable? I mean, everyone thinks UConn's just going to steamroll everybody. Is there any reason why you should bet against them, right? So I think it's very likely that coming out of this weekend, one or two of these 1 seeds are gone. So kind of keep that in the back of your head, because yes, you're going to bet the Sweet 16, but remember, it's the next day. So you're going to have your Sweet 16 games, and then the very next day, you're going to have your Elite Eight games. So it's got to be a quick turnaround. You got to be on the ball, and you have to keep this in the back of your head. If you watch all four 1 seeds make it through, probably one of them or two of them is going home by the time we get to Sunday night. All right. So keep an eye on that. The Madness Pass, I'll link it down in the description. We just dropped the price for the remainder of the tournament if anyone's interested in that. We'll try to keep this going. We did well over the weekend, so let's try to keep that going into the next rounds. And good luck with your bets, everybody. Thanks for watching. Catch you guys next time. See ya.